To us, magic sounds like this extraordinary thing, pulling a rabbit out of the hat, coming out of nowhere. But it's here, it's real, and the more that we are open to the unseen, to the energies of this world, to abundance and manifesting, to calling in and growing, the more we'll be able to call magic into our lives. Join me as I share stories, wisdom, and curiosity around connecting with your higher frequency, tapping into the synchronicities of the universe, and opening up to the unseen possibilities that this world has to offer. I am your host, Dayna Faye, and this is the Ordinary Magic Podcast. So today I am talking to Bryan Colter from Bryan Colter Astrology. Bryan is an evolutionary astrologer. He's an energy healer and a meditation teacher. He has a YouTube channel where he posts bi-weekly astrology videos coupled with guided meditations. And that is where I found Bryan about 9 months ago. I go on YouTube to get my astrology information, and there's a lot of different personalities on YouTube. And I came across Bryan's channel and I just really instantly started enjoying your work a lot. You post every new moon, every full moon. You really teach us about the evolutionary gain and what's going on with the astrological weather. And then you couple it with a meditation at the end that always feels very, it's very guided. It's very somatic. It brings me back into my body. And when I reached out to you to see if you'd be on the podcast, I said, hey, just let you know, I call you the Bob Ross of astrology. Which you said you had never heard before. But for those of you who don't know who Bob Ross is, he was that painter who had a show, and he just, he did his art. He had this like calm demeanor about him, but also put in some funny jokes here and there, and like just really fun to watch. And that's how I feel about you. So thank you so much for bringing your work into the world.
Yeah, my pleasure. When I was a kid, I used to call him Bob the Painter. That's how I knew him. And who knows, maybe he rubbed off on me a little bit as a kid. Just sitting in preschool, it used to be one of my favorite shows to watch. So I've never looked at his chart. I don't know if his chart's available online, but I wonder if we have some similarities.
That would be a cool thing to look into.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he really is. So how did you come into the point where you're at in your life in regards to your fascination around astrology, that you're teaching meditation, and that really you're helping these great changes that are happening over these current years and these future years of everyone's consciousness evolving? Is this something that you've always been into, or have you kind of went through your own metamorphosis yourself?
Yes, my metamorphosis happened during my first Saturn return, which happens for a lot of folks. The Saturn return occurs anywhere from like age 28 to 31, somewhere in there. It's a little different for everybody. But first Saturn return is a very powerful event. And basically, previous to that period of time, I was a professional poker player, which is pretty interesting considering what I do now. It feels like another lifetime ago. And I was very much, I was kind of a pothead gamer, poker player. I was still contributing to society and making money and pay the bills, but I was just kind of lost in my own world. And then my Saturn return hit, I sobered up, and I just grew a voracious appetite for everything metaphysical, spiritual, meditation. I first sunk my teeth into like Myers-Briggs personality tests. I found that to be super interesting. And I had some astrology readings here and there. I was introduced to numerology as a kid because my mom was into that, so I was somewhat familiar with that style of work. And I wasn't super impressed with astrology the first couple of readings I had, but then I had this one reading that just blew my mind. I was like, I got to look into this. So I started studying it. And alongside that, I was studying meditation and mysticism. And I've gotten to a place to where I've blended them together.
I know everybody goes through something interesting in their Saturn return, but yours sounds like a huge shift. Was there something that you were able to connect in your chart of, on one hand, being this poker player and kind of being in that world, gaming, kind of like in your head, like you said, kind of matches then your appetite for metaphysical, like, is there something in your chart where you could see like, oh, this kind of thing interests me?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that blew my mind about astrology, because I looking back in my life, it's like, oh, it all makes sense now. So yes, I'm a Sagittarius. That's my sun sign. But my sun is also right next to the planet Neptune, which is a planet associated with mysticism, with meditation, with spirituality. And that's a positive expression of somebody who has a strong Neptune in their chart, is growing closer to God, raising one's consciousness in whatever method they really like to do. And then the shadow side of having Neptune on the sun is addiction, because people who have a strong Neptune are psychically sensitive. And ideally, they're leveraging that psychic sensitivity towards the betterment and evolution of their soul through meditation, whatever that means, contemplative, meditative life. Also, Neptunian people tend to be pretty creative. That's another aspect of it. And if it's not used in a more beneficial way, that sensitivity, it's also the dark side. Every front has a back. The escape artist or the addict would be a shadowy representation of a strong Neptune. And my sun and
Wow.
Neptune are in the fifth house of games and gambling and creativity. So it fits quite
Whoa.
strongly in my case. And this is way before I knew anything about astrology. I was into these things.
I have, as if you can see, I'm like looking over because I've printed my chart off and I have the little house wheel to help me with a cheat sheet today. So my Neptune is in the sixth house. But when you say a strong Neptune, how do you know when a planet is strong or not?
There's a variety of ways.
Okay.
I would say the strongest signature is when a planet, in this case Neptune, is right next to the sun or the moon or the ascendant. The ascendant is what you'll see off to the left-hand side of the chart, also known as the rising sign. Also, Neptune could be powerfully placed if it's in its own sign, Pisces, or if it's in its own house, the 12th house. So depending on what planet you're talking about, there's also something called a chart ruler. So there's many ways to have a strong planet, but I'd say the strongest signature is when that planet is next to the sun or moon or ascendant.
Okay. Wow. So to back it up for some of the listeners that are new to astrology, I'm so fascinated by, it seems like the history of astrology many, many, many years ago was really revered and actually really used as a practical tool. And then somehow it was turned into more like, oh, this is only for mysticism or mystical people. It's esoteric. It's not real. And now we're in this kind of mainstream where it's like everyone kind of just knows their sun sign and maybe like, oh, Mercury went into retrograde, but no one really knows what it means. Can you explain what astrology is to those who are new to it, and maybe why it hasn't been taken as seriously, and why we actually should use it as a very real tool in our lives?
Yeah, astrology is understanding where the planets are around the sun, but also from our perspective on Earth, and how those planets might be affecting us, not only as a collective, but us on a personal level. So what I was just talking about in my chart, having Neptune conjunct the sun in the fifth, very much speaks to my own personal relationship with the planets. There are what are called archetypes associated with each planet. With Neptune, I reference the mystic and the drug addict, as a polarity. So each symbol, not only planets, but signs and houses, have archetypes associated with them. And they say a lot about our soul contracts in this lifetime. Another aspect with evolutionary astrology is we definitely take a karmic look at things and get a sense of what your karma is leading up to this current incarnation. But then there's also how the planets today affect the collective, which is primarily what I focus on in my YouTube videos. And yes, historically, it's been widely accepted. Of course, that's begun to shift a little bit, and now it's labeled as a pseudoscience in some circles. And I think this is due in part, a large part, to the scientific method. If we can't test this thing out and prove it through the scientific method, therefore it's false and doesn't work, or it doesn't exist. And really that depends on how sensitive the instruments are. And that's a major aspect of this Aquarian age that we're in. Now, an age is a 2100-year cycle. We're leaving the Piscean age, entering the Aquarian age. And since the archetype, one of them associated with Aquarius, is the genius, it's linked to innovation and inventions and technology. So we're entering into this technological information age, and science is a big, big part of that. And science is an amazing thing. But as science catches up with what the mystics have been saying for thousands of years, and we embrace energy, we embrace consciousness, and not see it as some woo-woo thing, then we're off to the races. It's going to be some exciting times. And astrology has gotten quite popular. I think they did some studies back, early 2000s, maybe in the 80s or 90s, where, at least in the Western world, only about 25% of people believed in astrology. That might be a little higher in India because there's a culture that really believes in astrology. But that's begun to shift and change because millennials and Gen Z are now the biggest age demographics, and they really dwarf the baby boomers. They more like 50% believe in astrology based on some polls and stuff. So it's very much made its way into popular culture. And even for folks who don't believe in astrology, as you said, oh, Mercury is in retrograde. It's like, what? It's kind of like the fallback. Something went wrong. Where's Mercury? Yeah. So its popularity has risen, which is nice for me, as an astrologer. And I think it's a very powerful tool to not only gain one's insight about their own journey, and through that confirmation, they receive inspiration about aspects of their character that they may have previously been too hard on themselves about or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, I am like that, and that's okay. And how can I be an even better that, whatever that theme is we're talking about? And that can help the person to evolve, because if you come from this more inspiring place, your consciousness, your frequency is much higher. And you can manifest the more positive expression of those symbols found in the chart. So it's a powerful science.
And it feels like, to me, the fact that we go through a 2100-year-old cycle of, we were in Pisces. And right now, if you're alive, you are alive during the time where it's switching, so not everyone has that experience. What does that mean for us? Can you paint a picture of what that's like on a collective level, and then what maybe we can look in our own personal chart for on an individual level?
Yeah, it is an exciting time. And I'm sure a lot of people have said this throughout history. What a crazy time to be alive, so we're not unique in that. But from when we talk about this, major epochal shift, it is an exciting time. This age of information, look how much rapid acceleration we've had in technology. We went from Wright brothers' first flight to the moon in 66 years. We dropped the atomic bombs in between.
Yeah.
And then you have computers and cell phones. And as blinding as that was in terms of how fast that was, it's nothing compared to what we're headed into, because this continues to accelerate. Now, when did the Aquarian age start? I mean, nobody really knows. It didn't start in July 26, 1987 at 3:23 a.m. It's these 2100-year events. They come on like a wave. And that wave lasts multiple centuries, 2 or 3 centuries. So these are just approximations. But as Pluto recently entered Aquarius, was a major event, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, it's really cemented us into this Aquarian age. And the rapid acceleration of technology is going to be even faster than it was before. In terms of how we can work with this on a more personal level, Aquarius is the sign of genius, as I said, but it's also the rebel and the revolutionary. And the rebel and the revolutionary represents individuality, which is kind of a fancy word, but it basically just means being yourself, being your individualistic expression, expressing more of your soul energy, like who you are at the core of your being. And that core of your being is a summation of multiple lifetimes, instead of who you've been trained to be by culture and family. So we all have something unique, some unique aspect of our character, but also gifts to give to the world to help usher us into this Aquarian age, which we're invited as a collective to be more individuated and to be less defined by the opinions of others and those subtle and not so subtle psyops that influence everybody.
That's beautiful. And that's something that I love when you say, like, being, like, we're going to be our own individual self. That comes from feeling who you are from the inside. And that's where your meditations come in, are so beautiful to really get us back into our body and embody ourselves. And when you were talking, I felt just a tiny bit of fear when you said, you thought it was fast before, like it's going to really take off. And I felt that all the talks about Pluto moving into Aquarius, which happened earlier this year, and it seemed like all anyone wanted to talk about was AI. And now, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Pluto has retrograded back into Capricorn, which that's where it was from 2008 until the beginning of this year. And now I seriously feel like, yeah, even though people are still talking about AI, it doesn't seem as like in my face right now. But we just got a preview of it a couple months ago. Is that kind of on track for where we're going to head when Pluto goes back into Aquarius? Is that at the end of this year or in the beginning of 2024?
Yes, it enters back into Aquarius. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but I think it's the end of this year, 2023, perhaps the beginning of 2024. So like December, January, it re-enters Aquarius. And then it'll be in Aquarius for 8 or 9 months, and then it'll go retrograde again, and then do one little tour through Capricorn one last time.
It's like easing us in a little bit.
It's snicker snacking back and forth right on that transitional point between Capricorn and Aquarius. And you're quite right. It entered Aquarius back in March, just left Aquarius, and re-entered Capricorn this month. And you said it exactly. It was like a preview, a sneak preview of what's to come. And I've been paying close attention to what's been going on, especially regarding technology during this 2 or 3 month period, because it says so much about, and this is just the beginning, it says so much about what Pluto and Aquarius will bring over the next couple of decades. As you said, it entered Capricorn in 2008. So it's a very slow mover. It spends a lot of time in a given sign. And each time it changes signs, it's a major energetic shift within the collective. This is like generational changes. So yes, AI, as soon as Pluto entered Aquarius, all of a sudden AI, everybody's talking about AI. So that was like in your face. So that was a major part of that. And then also, I found this to be significant. Although SpaceX has been doing its thing for quite some time, they got the Starship off the platform, and it went way high in the sky. It eventually exploded. But the people at SpaceX found that not as a failure, but a major victory with huge implications for humanity as a whole. I think space travel will far exceed what they're trying to do with the rockets. However, it was a signal of what's to come, which is also very exciting.
So you also said implications. What does that mean?
Well, AI is going to be a major part of our reality moving forward, and we're just getting a taste. And the implications are vast because there's a dark side of AI, and then there's a side of AI that's very helpful to humanity. So on one level, we're going to be very efficient as a collective, as a society, but then also the sci-fi movies of the world paint a picture of the darker potential. You don't need to really talk about that.
Yes, there's a million movies on Netflix that you can just look up right now to see that.
And this is everything. We're living within the realm of duality.
Yeah.
Here on planet Earth. The light side of the force, the dark side of the force. So there's a positive expression of AI, and then there's a negative expression of AI, and just understanding that juxtaposition, realizing that that's really going to be on the forefront of our awareness over the next couple of decades, major part of it, as well as technology, space travel, how we work with energy. Physics is going to go through a major change. And whenever physics goes through a major change, like the dropping of the atomic bomb, it changes reality as we know it. Physics more so than anything else. And I think physics, I don't know what will be the trigger for it, but I think physics will go through a major breakthrough, which will change reality as we know it. It's hard to even imagine.
In a, what feels like a hopeful way,
Yeah,
right?
I believe
Yeah.
so. I mean, I'm a Sag. I'm pretty optimistic.
That's awesome. And that's what I felt like when Pluto went into Aquarius was, okay, there's all this AI, it's in my face, but I've been on this spiritual journey of raising my own consciousness. And if anything, I felt this fire under my ass to be like, no, I'm going to be my own AI. Like, yes, I can use this tool and some people might use it for, not good things, or some will use it for great things, but I also want to have the power inside me. Do you kind of feel that way, that this is, like you kind of said, consciousness will be evolving and that we will also have our own technology inside of us that will just get more and more heightened as we progress?
Yeah, absolutely. Our level of consciousness means everything. And just on a personal level, coming from more love and peace, unconditional love, joy. Joy is a very high frequency, as opposed to fear, pride, anger, guilt, shame, which energetically are at a lower frequency. And it's all part of the spectrum of our experience as humans. I'm not trying to, everybody experiences some of that anger or fear. But in my opinion, just on a personal level, I feel it's my greatest interest to try to cultivate that those more loving set of emotions, okay, and be hyper aware of when I'm dipping more into anger and pride, recognizing that as low consciousness or stress based or egoistic expressions of human potential, and then always strive for love. I'm a big fan of the work of David Hawkins. He created the scale of consciousness, and the scale of consciousness is from 0 to 1,000 in terms of what our frequency can be as a human in any given moment. 1,000 being like, Christ consciousness or like the highest possibility. And then 0 being basically lifeless or dead. And then anything below 200 is those more egoic emotional states that I reference. Everything above 200, all the way to 1,000, is a more positive expression. And the more we raise our consciousness, the more we can express the higher octave expressions of those archetypes that we can see in our birth charts, as opposed to the more egoic ones. And the more we raise our consciousness on an individual level, it has a positive impact in the people around us. It rubs off. So too, if we're coming
It's
from
like a
fear
ripple
and
effect.
anger, it rubs off too, because we can feel it. And it creates this egregore of energy within the collective. Over the last few years, for obvious reasons, there's been, on average, more fear and uncertainty within the collective, more stress, more anger.
Yeah.
And when people
It
are in fear consciousness, their perception of reality is easily manipulated, which has also been a problem. But if we can raise our consciousness in a more positive way, we can have a positive effect on others, and that can ripple out too. So, yes, on an individual level, if we raise our consciousness, we do our own small part for the collective consciousness in helping to raise that. If there's some Chinese mystic in a cave meditating 20 hours a day, and he's floating in the air in the full lotus and he's glowing in the dark, you could say, well, he's just by himself. Yeah, he's evolving spiritually very rapidly. That's pretty impressive. Here he is, a living Jedi. But what good is he doing in the world? Well, in fact, he's helping millions of people just by existing on planet Earth at that level of consciousness. That's something else David Hawkins proved. He says somebody operating at 700 level consciousness, which is basically enlightenment, counterbalances, I think something like 20 million people or something like that. I'd have to look at the stats again. So consciousness is key. I always love to say that. And you can use your chart to raise your consciousness as you feel that inspiration heading towards, again, the highest octave potential for you as you manifest your destiny, so to speak. But then also, and this is why I like to do meditation in my work, meditation, in my opinion, is one of the most powerful methods to do that. and you can blend and merge them together.
That's beautiful. And I feel like that brings so much hope. I think oftentimes people feel helpless, like they don't know what to do. So learning about your own astrology chart is a perfect first step. If someone was just getting started past getting to know their sun, moon, and rising, because would you agree that that's a really, really great place to start? What would be kind of the next thing for paying attention to where the astrology is currently in conjunction with your placements of your specific chart?
Yes, I would definitely start with the sun, moon, and ascendant. And there's a lot packed into that. That can keep you busy for a while because, yes, you're working with 3 signs. Well, sometimes you have unique situations where you'll have 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 3 all in the same sign. So it's not always 3 different signs. But commonly they will be in different signs and they'll be in different houses. And learning about the signs, thinking about how they might interact with each other integratively, learning about the houses of your chart. Now, signs are intrapsychic processes. They're psychological. They teach us a lot about people's instincts and motivations and drives. They're the psyche, basically. But then the houses of the chart are where they're meant to play out those psychological impulses in their life. So the signs are more who, where, and the houses are more where in the life that wants to be expressed. And then from there, in regards to your birth chart, a good next step is understanding what are called the nodes of the moon of your chart, equally as important as sun, moon, and ascendant. And the nodes are always opposite each other in their chart. They look like little horseshoe-shaped symbols in your chart. And the south node of the moon represents, at least through the lens of evolutionary astrology, represents karmic habit energies of the past and gives us a sense of what your past life must have felt like and what it was you were trying to learn in the past life. Obviously, we use the reincarnational model with our work. And much like, let's say you're studying English in college, taking a class, you have a school textbook, but what you learn in chapter 3 of that book is going to be much different from what you learn in chapter 10, but yet it's the same class, the same study.
So to give an example of that, my north node is Aquarius. I believe then the south is
Absolutely,
Leo,
yeah.
right? So in the past, from an evolutionary aspect, what would that mean of having already experienced the Leo energy?
Well, it can mean a lot of different things. It depends on what's called the nodal structure. So you have the sign plus the house the south node's in. The planet that rules Leo, which is the sun, will also play a key role. And then any planets that are in aspect to the nodes or the rulers. So that's a quick little note.
Oh my gosh,
a lot.
Because I also have Leo as my ascendant. So I'm like, yeah, that's a loaded one.
As it always is with astrology, you have to be super careful about making an analysis in a vacuum. You know, there's so many symbols to be juggling simultaneously, which is really the art form in astrology, parsing out those core themes when you're juggling multiple different archetypes and symbols. But if we were just to look at Leo in a vacuum, Leo is archetypally known as the king of the beasts, which is the lion. So it represents king energy, queen energy. And oftentimes, not always, depends on the rest of the symbols, but oftentimes it's connected to a past life of privilege, you know, with that king energy or queen energy, like, you know, born into some aristocratic family or upper crust of society, or who knows, maybe even a royal family. And it's also a very creative sign, so that's part of it as well. So if there's artistic themes in the past life, it might go down the more artistry path, the past life of the performer. The learning curve of having a Leo South node is these lifetimes are fraught with expectations about what is proper behavior, and that profoundly affects how they choose to express themselves. So we use that as a contrasting background, as a learning curve to the North Node, which is your karmic medicine or remedy to the excesses of the South Node. So we do look at the South Node more negatively, like what were the stumbling blocks in the past life, not to just be negative, but just because that's more useful information. And then say, okay, this is where you stumbled a bit with Leo. The antidote is Aquarius, which is, we talked about it before, it's the rebel, the revolutionary. It's about authenticity and being yourself. And having a Leo south node, the pressures imposed upon you to be a certain thing were so strong that you became that thing. And you were heavily influenced by the opinions of others. So having an Aquarian North Node is getting to this healthy place of I am who I am. If you like me, that's great. If not, that's interesting. So it's the North Node is a hard point to reach because it's directly opposite from where you've come from karmically. So it's foreign, it's exotic, it's hard to reach and master, but there's so much growth there. I call the North Node the point of enlightenment in your chart. Because if you really master that thing, it's like getting an A+ on your report card.
And then to look at it in what house it's in, mine is in the 7th house, which is the house of marriage and partnerships.
Mm-hmm. The North Node is?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with Leo South Node in the first house, we take that idea of privilege, but first house is also leadership. So the idea that there was kind of a power struggle in the past life, for what reason, I don't know. We'd have to paint the picture with the rest of the symbols. But there is this power struggle and relationships that felt more unequal. Okay. Whereas North Node in the 7th house, the house of equality, the house of intimacy, the house of partnership. So you're coming from this past life of leadership and power and privilege into this karmic medicine of figuring out who you are as an individual in your closely bonded relationships and trying to form relationships built on equality instead of inequality.
Wow. I resonate with so much that you said there, especially in regards to looking at like the first 20 years of my life. I was like in every sport. I was a singer, so I performed a lot. And without even realizing it, I was starting to people please. Whenever people would clap for me, I would just keep doing whatever they wanted.
Yeah, that's Leo.
Without actually asking myself what I wanted. So this is blowing my mind. And I also have the Leo rising. So in my head, I'm like, well, I also exude that maybe performer Leo quality. So it got really confusing when I started to learn some astrology jargon of like, don't be your south node. So how you just re-explained it, it just warms my heart to know like that experience and path was on purpose. And I also lived a pretty comfortable childhood. And then in my 20s, really kind of popped around in regards to career and making money and just really struggled. And now just in like, I would say this past year of going out on my own as an entrepreneur, I've really sat in this Aquarius rebel energy of I'm a real estate agent, plus I'm a human design teacher, and I have this spiritual podcast, and I am just going to be me, and that's how it's going to go. So that's very interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. Yeah, and podcast is very Aquarian because it's part of the Aquarian age, part of the age of information, and you're exchanging ideas with others. The 7th house of intimacy. And that whole idea that you'll read about online in some places where don't be your south node, I don't really agree with that. Don't be the negative expression of your south node, which you definitely struggled with in the past life. All Leo south node people do. Because whatever our south node is a useful way of thinking of it is we kind of suck at that. We have this vulnerability to the darker expression of that symbol. However, we also have the hard-fought, hard-won wisdom of that sign. There's positive qualities with the South Node as well. We don't focus on that as much, again, because it's not as useful. But that's karmic carryover. You've been working with Leo for potentially lifetimes. It's hard to really say from this vantage point. But you have your, Leo rising to boot. Obviously, you're wearing the mask of the performer. That's one way of putting the rising sign as a mask, because the rest of the birth chart really shines through that ascendant. The ascendant is the stained glass window through which your psyche shines, or how your consciousness interfaces with cosmos. So you come across as a Leo, somebody who's expressive, and you were in the past life too. So that you carry that aspect so naturally. But you just want to do it in a more evolved way where it's not what do you want me to perform, but rather I'm going to learn how to perform in a more authentic way. And that love you put out
Yes.
through the expression to an audience, and a healthy expression of it, instead of having so much expectation about, what are the reviews they're going to write about this performance, rather just focus on the energy, the expression of love, practicing vulnerability through self-expression, which is the healthy Leo path. And then if the audience claps, you get the love reciprocated back to you. So love put out, you get back. But with the Aquarian North Node, the more authentic you can be, the more you'll grow and evolve.
Wow. That just warms my heart so
Oh, good.
much to hear that. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So everybody look up your north node and your south node. There's always two that go together. So at least if you find your north, sometimes it's hard to find your south, right? But there's some free resources out there for you guys to check that out. That's a great place to look. And like you said before, we kind of jumped right over it, but starting at your sun, your moon, and your rising is a huge place to start.
So the sun, moon, and ascendant, I call it the primal triad, really makes up the backbone of your birth chart, the backbone of your psyche. And it's kind of silly to break this down mathematically, but we can approximate 50% of your evolution is occurring through this core primal triad. And the sun represents your identity. If you think of the literal sun in the solar system, like all the planets orbit the sun, it's the boss of the sky. As above, so below, the astrological sun is like the boss of you. It's the gravitational center of your head. So words associated with the sun are identity, self-image, values, ego, not necessarily in the negative sense of the word, sanity and vitality, which basically means knowing who you are and where you're headed in life. So the sun sign, this will take us down a lot of different directions depending on what the sign and the archetypes are, but speak to your core identity and the values you must be true to feel whole, sane, and vital. And when you have a strong response to your sun sign and the house it's in and any planets that are interacting with the sun, you feel revitalized and saner, energized and on the right path, a sunnier disposition, full of life force, ready to take on the world. And then the moon is the center of your chest. It's your heart, it's your soul, your emotional world, and your subjective reality. It's more about feelings and instincts. And your moon sign is like your mood averaged over a lifetime. So our moods have a lot of peaks and valleys, obviously. If we were to smooth out all those sharp edges, we get the general baseline mood of the life, which will be indicated by the sign. And it'll also give us clues on the secret of emotional happiness and well-being for you, secret of self-nurturing. So if you're ever feeling really sad or depressed or emotionally down, it's always useful to go to your chart and say, okay, what's my moon sign? What house is it in? How can I work with this a little more to inject some more happiness into my heart, so I can feel some of these more high consciousness emotions?
So to give an example on that, I have a Taurus moon in my 10th
Mm-hmm.
house.
So yeah, the secret of emotional happiness and well-being for you is to really connect with that Taurus energy, which is classically known as the bull in astrology. That's the primary archetype. Not like the Spanish bullfight bull that kind of gives us a distorted view of it's just a male cow. It's a peaceful creature if you leave it alone and don't stick pins in it, So, but really it's animal spirit. It's the whole animal kingdom, so pick your favorite animal or totem animal. And if you just go to the natural habitat of that animal, like for example, a cow, and there you are, beautiful spring day, plenty of grass. You got a blade of grass in your mouth, watching the cows be cows. How do you begin to feel? Earthy, grounded, peaceful. This is the goal with the Taurus moon and part of your secret of emotional happiness. And how you go about doing that, there's many different ways with Taurus, but usually it's just becoming very familiar with the body, with these monkey bodies that we have. It's the most sensual sign in the zodiac. I don't mean that sexual necessarily, but just of the five senses. It's also known as the archetype of the musician. So for a lot of Taurus folks, just listening to music, that's part of listening. That's one of the senses. Maybe not some hardcore death metal. Maybe that's not so peaceful. Maybe it is for some folks. I don't know. But
Not me,
yes,
no.
or just being out in nature. It's the sign of nature. Listening to the birds chirp, listening to the creek go by your feet. Earthy, grounded, peaceful. This is the goal with the Taurus moon, is to really in this lifetime put your peace foot forward. Because whatever happened to you karmically with the Leo, power struggle, prestige, whatever that was, wasn't peaceful. So that gives us the why you were chose as a soul to be born with the Taurus moon, to play out this more earthy, grounded, reasonable life. And we talked about being triggered before. That's a great strategy for you. Get into the body, bring your conscious awareness into the body, and do activities that bring you into peace, into the body, like getting a massage or giving a massage. And it's also a strong builder energy. It's an earth sign. So you have this builder energy in the house of mission. 10th house is the house of mission, classically known as the house of career. Fair enough, no problem there. Career, however, is too narrow a word because the 10th house begins where our personal relationships end. And that goes beyond, what our career is. It's our connection to the community at large and the larger calling of destiny and mission. So clearly you have a mission, a lunar mission, which is to say you're here to be a healer of sorts with your Taurus grounded wisdom. And how amazing of a healer you become is directly dependent on how much healing you do for yourself. So heal thyself, healer, to embrace this destiny as the healer, as the earth goddess for humanity. That sounds pretty lofty.
Wow. No, I love the sound of it.
Yeah, lean into that.
But I really resonate. Even when you said about the musician the other day, when I was in kind of a low place, let's call it being triggered or whatever, I hadn't played the piano in a long time. And I printed out some music, played the piano, started singing with that particular song. And I just felt this energy swell inside me, and it came out in tears, and I just felt incredibly embodied after that. So that's kind of an example of the Tauran
Exactly.
energy.
Yeah, and for folks out there looking at their moon sign and house, it just takes some investigation about the sign. And, a lot of the pop astrology out there, nothing wrong with it, but it tends to be focused more on personality traits. Oh, you have a Taurus moon, you're stubborn. You'll read that in the first 3 lines of the website or whatever, or the book on the Taurus chapter. And yeah, okay, it's a fixed sign. Stubbornness is a part of Taurus, and that can be used in good ways as well as not so good ways. But it's so much deeper than that. And yeah, it's useful to think about personality traits, but then what is the evolutionary purpose of being born with a moon sign, which you don't see a lot online. And through the evolutionary lens, it's to put your peace foot forward. It's to calm down. You're learning to just breathe in, breathe out, and be embodied in this lifetime. There's more than that, obviously. You have the rest of the planets and all the houses. But with Moon and Taurus, that is one core goal for you.
Wow. I really love that reframe in regards to the pop astrology, especially even what you said about the 10th house of that being mission, because in my little cheat sheet that I have here today, the first word is career. So every time I look at the 10th house, I'm like, oh, my moon, my sun, my Mercury, they're all in career. Okay, I have to figure out my career. I've never thought of it as a solo mission for the collective, not necessarily just for myself and my career.
Yeah, and planets in the 10th house do 2 things. One of them not as well, the other one beautifully. The thing they don't do as well is tell us exactly what your mission is. They can be very helpful in that regard, but these symbols are impressionistic in general, although they do point our noses in the right direction. But what they do radically well is tell us what has to develop in you in order for your mission to fully manifest. And that's the more active evolutionary ingredient. When the flower opens, the bees come. So the more grounded, centered, earthy you get in your life, the more you heal yourself, you open up to this larger destiny for the soothing or benefit of other individuals, for your community.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's incredibly layered.
Oh, yeah.
For all the listeners, do you want to talk about some of your offerings, your YouTube? You have so many resources on your website and different types of readings as well.
Yeah, my website's bryancolter.com. I have readings there. I got the birth chart reading, the past life reading. There's also another reading called Looking Forward, where we can gain insight into the current chapter of your life, what energy you're working with in the here and now and the next couple of years moving forward. I also do what's called consciousness coaching, which is a little different, where we just focus on mysticism and meditation. And then I also have some astrology classes on there. And then in regards to my YouTube channel, it's just Bryan Colter Astrology. I do, as you said before, bi-weekly videos for the new moon and full moon, and where I just talk about, okay, this is the energy going on now. This is what you're likely to see within the collective, at least above average. And then this is how you can work with it on a more personal level. And then I transition to a guided meditation, which will help you to work with it on a more personal level as you deepen your relationship with that energy, with those archetypes.
Yeah. And definitely check out that YouTube channel. Even if you're new at astrology, it's the perfect place to start, because I always learn at least one thing, one golden nugget that really hits me. And I noticed that you are popping your meditations on a podcast called Expanded Consciousness. So if oftentimes I'll watch the YouTube, I'm not in a place to do the meditation maybe right then, but I either pick back up on YouTube or grab it on your podcast later, which is super helpful. So go to Bryan's website, check it out if you guys are interested. And I guess in regards to, wrapping it up today in our conversation, how we kind of started with talking about our evolving consciousness and these different tools that we can use, the meditation, the astrology, the just like looking at our subconscious work, all those things. We're halfway through the year of 2023. What's kind of what can we expect coming for the rest of 2023? What any type of tips or advice do you have for us staying grounded in our bodies and just continuing to raise our consciousness?
Well, there's a lot to expect moving forward for the rest of the year. One of the primary events going on is Pluto in Capricorn, as we mentioned before. And Pluto, which is archetypally known as the god of hell, it's kind of an unfortunate moniker, but hell representing basically our own inner hell worlds. We also have inner paradises, but when we talk about the hell world within, it's more about that place within the subconscious, which is more wounded and traumatized. So Pluto is the planet of trauma. And when we're talking about affecting the collective, Pluto and Capricorn, which has been a major theme since 2008, is highlighting the dark side of Capricorn as we associate it to the collective, which is more about the dark side of power, the dark side of ambition. And, it's been a time of basically a big power grab and basically leveraging that power to control the masses. So with Pluto re-entering Capricorn, it's kind of like a last hurrah with this planet where that grip is going to be tightened. Now that sounds like a big doom and gloom reading. I don't shy away from the darker potentials. It is a major thing, but it's not going to be like in your face, everybody's face, like on a personal level. It's just realizing that, okay, this is happening, and let's not get hung up in that with anger or rage or fear, oh no, what's happening, but rather doing our own personal work to raise our consciousness. And working with Pluto on a personal level is working on your own trauma, your own history, and seeking to transform. Pluto's the planet of transformation. So ultimately transform those, let's say, painful emotions into love and light. It's a process of transmutation, the phoenix diving into the ashes to come up reborn. And the more you do that work, you can lean into the positive expression of Capricorn, which is responsibility, integrity, accountability, great strength, the ability to focus on your great work and do the hard necessary to build that. And working with that on a more personal level will help you in the betterment and evolution during this year. Of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on simultaneously. How is it affecting your own personal chart? We'll add a lot of corrections to that statement, but that's the broad strokes way of working with it.
So, in the simplest way, understanding the Capricorn energy, kind of the dark side and the potential, and transmuting that in yourself. And if you want just a little deeper clue into how that affects your personal chart, you should look at where Capricorn, what house it's in.
Yeah, everybody has Capricorn somewhere in their chart. And you learn. I have a 15-minute class or tutorial on my website that I sell to help people familiarize with their own chart so they can, pinpoint where Capricorn is in their chart. And then they say, okay, there's Capricorn in my chart, so Pluto must be going through that specific house. And that'll give you some more clues on where you can do more of that dredging,
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. And then one last question, eclipse seasons. This is the first time last year that I ever paid attention to eclipse seasons. And it's crazy. The one last fall when it was, I think, a lunar eclipse in Taurus, and Taurus was in my 10th house. I mean, things aligned for me where I ended up putting in my 2-week notice at my corporate job.
Mm-hmm.
And then this past spring, April 19th, what I think was a solar eclipse in Aries. And that is in my 9th house. And I ended up dropping my first episode of my podcast about spirituality and the mystical, which is what the 9th house is about. So it just, how I'm learning astrology for myself is actually looking backwards, because then I can make sense of it and really feel the energies. So as I was preparing for a conversation today, I was like, oh, let me look forwards for once at eclipse seasons. So kind of just looking at this next fall in October. Is it the solar eclipse in Scorpio, I believe? And then in November, the lunar eclipse in Libra, if I remember correctly. Is that something that you do for yourself or for clients to be like, hey, every year there's an eclipse season, something kind of gets eclipsed in your life. It fast forwards some type of evolution or knocks you back. Like, how do you work with that?
Yeah, with the eclipses, they are very powerful. I tend to only focus on them in my YouTube videos, because in my YouTube videos, I'm focusing on the full moons and new moons. So every eclipse season, I'm working with both of those. And, eclipses are great harbingers of change. So they are major events. But in my client work, sometimes the client will ask me about it, and I'll certainly focus on it. The thing with working with eclipses on a personal level is they don't affect you always at the same level of magnitude. You have to pay close attention to, is it activating a core piece of your birth chart? Like, for example, it activated your 10th house. Boom, major change.
Yes.
So if it's happening somewhere off in some obscure corner of the chart, kind of mind its own business, sure, you can pay attention to that house and say, okay, well, how can I work with this eclipse? How can I really focus on this house, what it represents in my life? And maybe there's some new beginning I can create, or some change that I can activate. And that's a way you can work with it. But it's really strongest when it hits a planet. Back in, I think, 2017 or 2018, we had this very powerful blood moon, August or July or something like that. And that was the first time I met my wife-to-be, and it happened in the 5th house of romance. And it happened right on my sun.
That's so cool.
One of the most important aspects of my planet in my chart, anybody's chart. So if you have a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse sitting on your sun, pay close attention to it, for sure.
That really resonates, because there was I think the lunar eclipse this past May, I couldn't really tie much to it. But then looking at that in my chart, I don't have much there. So that makes total sense. Thank you so much. This has been so expanding and informative. So as the listeners here, as you guys are walking through your own human experience and maybe feeling some of these lower energies of fear, of the unknown, of just kind of the upheaval of what's happening during this great change, during this change to the Aquarian age, know that there are tools out there like evolutionary astrology to help you be re-inspired and give you perspective of kind of the journey that you're walking through. You're not alone. We're all in this together. And if we consciously choose to look at our subconscious habitual patterns, our thoughts, our evolution, that we can raise this consciousness together and really bring this better energy on the planet for all, and continue to step into those higher vibrations of the signs and the archetypes versus those shadow sides.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Bryan. This was such a treat. I'm just so happy you met with me today.
It was a pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Ordinary Magic is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Dayna Faye. Music is by Shane Ivers. Until next time, I wish you many powerful moments of ordinary magic.